Have you ever been in a conversation with someone who never stops talking and found yourself wondering if they ever get tired? They fill every pause before it even forms. They answer questions you haven't finished asking. They move from story to story, topic to topic, like they're afraid of what might happen if the room goes quiet for even a moment. And most people, if they're honest, find it exhausting. They smile and nod and wait for an opening that never comes. But here's the thing, and this is what most people miss. Have you ever stopped to wonder what that person is running from? It's easy to assume that people who talk too much simply love the sound of their own voice, that they're self-absorbed, inconsiderate, maybe a little arrogant, that they never learn to listen because they never cared enough to try. But here's what's often misunderstood. For many people, not all, but many, excessive talking has nothing to do with arrogance. It isn't selfishness wearing a loud coat. It's something far older and far more tender than that. It's fear. It's the nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do when silence started to feel like danger. Because here's the paradox at the center of all of this. The loudest people in the room are often the ones who are most terrified of being truly heard. They talk and talk and talk and still, somehow, feel completely invisible. And that gap between all those words and still not feeling known is where everything becomes complicated. Think back to what it's like to be a child in a house where silence means something is wrong. Maybe the quiet meant a parent was angry. Maybe it meant nobody was home. Not really. Maybe it meant you'd been forgotten, or that the emotional temperature of the room had dropped and you had no way of reading what came next. In homes like these, children learn something very specific and very powerful. Fill the space before something worse fills it for you. They become performers. They become entertainers. They tell jokes at dinner to ease the tension. They ask questions, not because they want the answer, but because a question keeps the conversation moving, and a moving conversation can't implode. They learn that words are a kind of control. And control, when you're small and powerless, feels like survival. This is where it starts. Not in selfishness, in strategy. But the child grows up, and the strategy doesn't. What protected them at 7 becomes a compulsion at 35. The adult version of this person walks into every room with the same nervous system that once lived in that unpredictable house. Scanning, filling, performing, steering. The mouth moves faster than the mind because somewhere deep underneath it all, the body still believes, if I stop talking, something bad will happen. And here's the part most people never admit. They don't even enjoy it. Ask someone who talks compulsively how they feel after a long social event, and they'll often say exhausted, hollow, like they were there but not really. Like they said 100 things and none of them were the real thing. Because the talking, the endless, effortless seeming talking, is not connection. It's armor. It's the noise you make to keep the world from getting close enough to see that you're afraid. Think of it this way. Imagine a person standing in an open field, and instead of letting anyone approach, they surround themselves with a wall of sound. From the outside, the wall looks energetic, entertaining, even magnetic. From the inside, it's just a wall. And walls, no matter how beautifully constructed, keep people out. That's what compulsive talking can become. A wall made of words. Because what nobody tells you is that the very thing designed to create connection is the same thing that prevents it. Every story told before someone else gets to speak is a missed opportunity to be known. Every joke landed before a silence gets to settle is a door shut before it had the chance to open. The person talking the most is, in many cases, the person least willing to be seen and least sure that being seen would be safe. And then there's the social layer to consider. We live in a culture that rewards the talkers. We call them confident, We call them charismatic. We put them on stage and on television. We mistake volume for certainty and speed for intelligence. The quiet person in the corner is shy. The loud person commanding the room is a natural leader. And so the person who has learned to fill silence with noise gets, year after year, positive reinforcement for the very behavior that is keeping them from ever really connecting. The world keeps applauding the wall, and the person behind it keeps building it taller. The emotional cost is something most people never calculate. It's the exhaustion of never being off. It's the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people who know your stories but not your silences. It's the quiet grief of realizing that you've spent years in conversations and can't remember the last time you felt genuinely understood. Psychologists call one aspect of this anxious attachment. It describes a relational pattern that often develops in early childhood when a caregiver was inconsistent, sometimes warm and present, sometimes cold or absent. Children in these dynamics learn that love is unpredictable. That connection has to be earned, maintained, performed. And so they develop strategies for keeping people close, talking being one of the most common. If I never stop performing, you'll never have the chance to walk away. A study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that anxiously attached individuals were significantly more likely to use verbal behavior, including excessive disclosure and conversation domination, as a way of managing relational anxiety. In other words, when the nervous system doesn't trust that love will stay, the mouth tries to make sure it does. There's also something researchers call verbal flooding, a term used in emotion regulation research to describe the tendency to use language as a way of processing or discharging emotional overwhelm. It happens when the emotional volume inside a person becomes too high to contain. Words become the pressure valve. The person isn't trying to dominate the conversation. They're trying not to drown. They are, in a very real sense, talking to survive the moment. And here's where it gets complicated. Neither of these patterns is a character flaw. They are adaptive responses, brilliantly designed by a nervous system that was trying to keep its person safe. The problem isn't that the strategy was wrong. The problem is that it outlived its usefulness. What kept you safe in childhood may be what's keeping you lonely in adulthood. But here's what this also means. If the behavior was learned, it can be unlearned. Not quickly, not easily, but it can. Because neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong ability to form new patterns, means that no response is ever truly fixed. The wall can have doors. Now, let's pause here for a moment. If any of this sounds familiar, not because you know someone like this, but because, quietly, you are someone like this, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are not some exhausting burden that people tolerate rather than love. What you're doing, even when it's getting in the way, even when it's pushing people back, is the best strategy you found for staying safe in a world that, at some point, didn't feel safe. That matters. That counts. You have spent years filling silences that once felt dangerous. You have talked through anxiety and grief and loneliness and uncertainty because that was the only tool you had. And yes, maybe it's time to look for other tools. Maybe it's time to let some silences live. But the person who learned to fill the room with noise to avoid abandonment is not weak. They are, in a way, one of the most adaptive people in the room. They felt the threat and responded. Every time. You're not alone in this, not even a little. And recognizing it, really sitting with the idea that your words might be a wall more than a window, that is not a defeat. That is the beginning of something different. So how do we hold all of this? How does a person who has spent a lifetime using words as armor begin to put them down without feeling naked, without feeling like they're disappearing? The answer isn't dramatic. It rarely is. Notice the impulse before you follow it. The next time you feel the urge to fill a silence, to jump in, to add a story, to redirect, just notice it first. You don't have to stop. Just notice. Ask yourself, am I talking because I have something to say, or because the quiet feels like threat? That 1 second of pause is not nothing. That 1 second is the beginning of a new relationship with silence. Practice being a little less interesting. This one sounds strange, but stay with it. The person who talks compulsively often believes, somewhere underneath it all, that they are only worth keeping around when they are performing. So the invitation is small. Try, just once in a conversation, to be ordinary. Ask a question and actually wait for the whole answer. Resist the urge to return to yourself. See what happens when you give the room to someone else. Notice that you are still there. Notice that no one left. Let someone see the silence. The wall of words exists because the person behind it doesn't trust that the real version, the quiet, uncertain, unperforming version, is worth knowing. So the practice, the terrifying and necessary practice, is to let someone in. Not everyone, just one person. Let them see you when you don't have a story ready. Let them see you think. Let them see the pause before you speak. Because the silence you've been hiding behind all those words, it's not empty, it's full of you. And slowly, not all at once, but slowly, the wall of sound begins to have openings. Not because it was torn down, but because you stopped needing it to be impenetrable. Think back to that person. The one who fills every silence, every pause, every gap in conversation before it has the chance to breathe. Maybe you see them differently now. Maybe you see yourself differently. The next time you find yourself talking past the point where you meant to stop, ask yourself what the silence would say if you let it. The answer will tell you more about what you're really longing for than any story ever could. Because the loudest rooms are sometimes the loneliest ones, and the bravest thing a person can do, after a lifetime of performing just to stay loved, is finally stop. Be still, and trust that who they are, without all the noise, is enough.